So today we're going to talk about how the divisions in the legislative body are going to move the revolution more towards basically a vehicle of terror and a vehicle of anguish for the average person in France, and moves away from this kind of peaceful transition into basically a new form of government. We're going to talk about how the Jacobins, or how the radicals, are going to take control of the revolution and then basically push their ideas with an iron fist on everybody else. So, as we saw in the last part, the radicals are kind of pushing forward the idea of the republic. They're taking a stance against the old regime to an extreme level. Essentially, if you aren't bourgeoisie, if you aren't part of the lower class, then you are an enemy. Again, we'll kind of see this later in history as well. But it's the idea that anybody that isn't with us is against us. So the nobles, seeking a return to the old regime, once they see that the radicals are starting to push these ideas, that the moderates are pushing away from this absolute monarchy, they're going to flee. They see the writing on the wall. Again, if they've taken out the power, or if they've taken the power away from the Catholic Church, who are they going to take power away from next? The only other group would be the nobles. So a lot of them are going to flee from France. Again, who has the money though, right? The nobles have a lot of the money. The nobles are the ones that make a lot of the economy, right? Or are holding on to a lot of the wealth in the economy, and they're going to leave the country, which will have negative repercussions later. They're actually going to flee with fear because they know that eventually they're going to be coming for them. On the flip side of that, you're going to have people in the lower class, the Parisian workers called the sans-culottes, who are going to want more change. These are going to be the lower class people that are looking to more radical ideas, thinking that they could not only get more representation, but they might even be able to benefit from it, right? If they have more say, maybe the system will work out in their favor. If they're the ones that are dictating and pushing for revolution, they will be in a better spot after the revolution than they were before the revolution. So the sans-culottes are going to be part of the large group of radicals that are pushing forward the idea of a republic, that are pushing forward for a more violent overthrow and kind of turnover in the government. And these are just normal people, right? These are the normal working class people that are doing this. Now, by 1792, France was at war with Prussia and Austria. So all of this revolution is happening. They're trying to turn over the government. They're trying to make a new constitution. They're trying to figure out what form of government they want. And at the same time, they're in a war with their neighbors. And again, Austria has been one of their enemies for the longest time. So you have an incredible amount of debt. You have a government that is basically barely holding on. And now you're going to add the outside stress of two countries trying to invade and go to war with you. That's just going to cause more stress for the people in the government in general. Now, one of the things that's happening at home is this kind of air of chaos that's going on. Okay, so this war is happening, and in the cities, in the big cities, there's this huge stress. There's this air of terror that's going on, that's going to culminate in these violent rebellions and these violent acts that seem to come out of nowhere. For example, there's the September massacre that's going to happen. Essentially, these people come together and they are they get this rumor that there's going to be this letting go of all of these prisoners and things like that. So they're running around and going from prison to prison, killing off the people in their cells. They're just full on killing them. There's over 1,000 lives that are claimed. Well, the thing is, this was a completely unfounded rumor. There wasn't a plan to let out these people. In fact, for the most part, all of these people that ended up dying are basically what we would consider nonviolent criminals. They're people that did petty theft or, small things like stealing food or, breaking and entering and things like that. Most of the criminals here were super small time women and children, things like that. In fact, at this time period, 17% of those prisoners were people that were religious. There were clergymen that just that decided that they didn't want to follow the rules of the government that had been imposed. Essentially, the government had decided that they had final say on religious actions and things like that of the church. Well, the people that didn't agree and were actively protesting and speaking out against the government were sent to jail. So 17% of the people that were killed in the September massacre were just clergymen that wanted to keep control over their own faith. Pretty devastating. Now, the term here I want to point out is Jacobin. Jacobin is going to be the group of radicals. That's like the most radical, most vocal group. So you're going to have these Jacobins that are going to become basically the face of the revolution. So you have Jean-Paul Marat, who is going to call for the execution of any of the king's supporters. So if you remember, the legislative body was radicals, moderates, and conservatives. Well, essentially what he's saying is if you're a conservative, you should be executed on the block. And we'll talk about basically what that means a little bit later. But if this is the public call that anybody that supports the king needs to be executed, and this is popular enough to get people moving, you have some trouble on your hands. So as these reformers, as these radicals are coming about the public square, they're going to push for the monarchy to be completely abolished. Again, the radicals, for some reason, are the most vocal and getting what they want. They're putting on these violent revolts. They're making public movements. They're getting rid of their opposition. They're trying to actively kill off any conservatives, any people that support the king. Well, they're basically getting enough support in the legislative body to abolish the monarchy entirely. So they've moved past this limited monarchy into full-blown kind of a republic, but we haven't set it up yet. They're just getting rid of everything that was from the king. And a national convention is put in place, essentially a government structure. January 1793, Louis was found guilty of treason and beheaded by guillotine. Now, one of the interesting things and one of the things that people typically associate with the French Revolution is the guillotine. And to explain that, we're going to actually go to an image here. So what the guillotine is a form of public execution. This is a technology that came out, oddly enough, right around the time of the French Revolution. I believe it predates in the 1770s. And what it was a quick way to publicly execute people in what they would describe as a clean and non-abusive manner. The thing is, you're still killing people. So I don't really know what that's going to achieve. Now, the guillotine was really big because it was a public display, a public execution. And especially in France, this is not a picture of France. This, I believe, is in Austria. The execution was meant to be seen. And the Jacobins and the radicals are going to use the guillotine as a means of publicly terrorizing people. They're going to take people that they do not like and publicly execute them to make other people afraid to support them. Again, we talk about this. This revolution has turned away from let's get some rights, let's get some representation, and it has turned into this you will support us or die. The Jacobins are calling for the execution of conservatives. They're calling for the execution of anybody that supports the king generally, and the king and queen himself. Him and herself, I should say. Okay. So this is no longer just a revolution of, hey, representation, let's earn some representation. Let's get some voice for the people. This is now about becoming a republic, regardless of how much blood you have to spill. And the reason why the French Revolution becomes associated so heavily with the guillotine is because this was the means of getting what you wanted. If you just killed off your opponent, you didn't have to worry about them. If you target everybody that doesn't agree, well, now you have no political opponents, right? It's the same idea. It's the same tactic that every terror regime uses. If you kill off the bad guys or who you perceive as the bad guys, then you don't have to worry about them anymore. Now, we're going to come back to this and just talk about it. So the radicals are going to put Louis XVI on trial for treason, for trying to escape, all of this stuff, and behead him. This is a public execution of the king. This is also very symbolic because you're physically killing off the one thing that represents the old order, the oppression that your country used to have. And they're going to publicly display his head. Okay. So this isn't just a clean execution and put him away. They gather people, they make a rally of this. They make a point to make this a big celebration of killing the king. Now, we're going to have somebody come in, one of the Jacobins, and he is going to become what I'm going to say is the figurehead for this time of terror. Okay. He is going to be Maximilien Robespierre. And Robespierre was a political figure back in the early days for the radicals. He is going to be one of the people that pushed for the republic for the longest time. And once the king is dead, well, now there's a power vacuum. Now there's somebody that can fill that gap. Now, something to point out here, as far as the French Revolution goes, we have gone from absolute monarchy, we've gone to a limited monarchy where we have an actual constitution and a Congress. We have now killed off the king, and now we're going to go to a dictatorship. So we went from more representation, and now with Robespierre, he's going to become a dictator. So we're now losing the same rights that we were just fighting for. Also, as a side note, he's going to try to set up what he would refer to as a republic of virtue. And if you've ever seen anything in history, as soon as you start saying that you're going to force people to be virtuous, most of the time that does not happen. Most of the time you're killing off people that don't think like you do, or it basically makes it really easy for you to set up who the enemy of the state is because they are not virtuous. So his republic of virtue is just a full-blown dictatorship, and he gets to kill off whoever he wants. So Robespierre is going to launch what's called the Reign of Terror. This is where he is executing anybody that is seen as not virtuous or not following the ideas of the radicals. Again, we've gone from trying to get representation to now just getting rid of anybody that is seen as undesirable. Okay, we're getting rid of poor people that don't favor this radicalness. We're getting rid of anybody that supported the king, who even thinks wrong, right? There's going to be thousands upon thousands of public executions. And this is really where the guillotine goes from being just a form of execution to almost a regular way of life, a regular spectacle where people are being executed in the town square for thinking the wrong way, or for being the wrong kind of person, for not being radical enough. So this revolution is just turned into a terror fest, essentially. Now, Marie Antoinette is going to be beheaded. Well, you have to ask yourself, what did she do? Is she a political figure? Maybe. But for the most part, her beheading was another symbolic gesture where she's or the radicals wanted to kill off the representation of overindulgence and the nobility. Her death was basically a frivolous waste of life, right? They've decided that they just wanted to cut off her head because she represented the old order, and they couldn't have anybody that was like that, or they might rally around her, regardless of her being from another country and also pretty much generally unfavored in the political community. Now, eventually, and we're kind of see this, any radical revolution is going to eat itself. It's kind of the snake eating its own tail. So as the revolution goes on, as this reign of terror goes on, the radicals realize that we've gone too far. Essentially, with Robespierre becoming a dictator and just killing people off because he didn't like them, they realized that this revolution was no longer about the people. It was about one person gaining power, Robespierre. So eventually the radicals come together, realize that they've gone too far, and grab Robespierre and then have him beheaded. Now, kind of the terrifying part of this, and this is kind of gross to think about, most people, when they're executed by the guillotine, they're put with their head down, and the blade will come and chop their head off. It basically cuts off your spine first, so you're in theory dead very quickly. Because Robespierre had become this figure of terror, of basically cruel and unusual waste of life, they decided that they were going to make a point of him. So when they publicly executed him, they put Robespierre upside down. So he was watching as the blade came down and cut off his own head. So they were hoping to make his suffering as long as they could with the same tool that he had used to kill so many people. after he is killed, they draft this basically new plan for the government. It's no longer just this kind of mishmash of legislative bodies that can be dominated by a small group. They're trying to set up an actual republic. And we're going to kind of see how moving forward, it's going to form like a republic. And then you're going to have a very strong political figure named Napoleon come and dominate the political scene. So again, in the grand scheme of things, we went from trying to get any representation, getting a constitutional monarchy, going back to a dictatorship, coming back and trying to get some form of a republic, and then we end up at a dictatorship again. So when people say that the French Revolution was this complete chaotic mess and was not necessarily successful, it's tough. Because they did accomplish their goals. There was an entire amount of wasted life to get there. And who knows if the French were actually better off at the end. Because the constitutional monarchy they could have had probably would have been successful. The republic that they got that ended with a dictator arguably was not. Right. And even moving forward, it's going to take them a long time before they actually achieve that level of representation that they really wanted, or at least that the radicals wanted.